So I just want to review the agenda for tonight. Again, I'll be your host, so I will be doing the introductions as well as talking about how you as an attendee can participate during the Q&A session after this presentation, as well as what our virtual meeting etiquette is. I'm sure you've heard it in a number of different VTA meetings or a number of different Zoom meetings, but we do have expectations of how we're going to communicate as well as treat each other tonight. We're also going to have a lengthy staff presentation by Janice Soriano Ramos, who's going to provide information to our attendees about the proposals that VTA is presenting to the VTA board. We're also going to have a Q&A and comments time at the end of the presentation. And then we'll just, I'll be closing it out and then what the next steps are going to look like for this project. Next slide. All right, so those of you who are new to Zoom, we do have a particular etiquette that we want to follow specifically during our Q&A session, because we want to make sure that everybody has time to get in their comments if they wish to provide a comment. If they have a question that we can possibly provide an answer, we want to make sure that we can do that in an orderly fashion. So we want to make sure we're treating all participants with kindness, respect, and consideration. We're going to ask that you type your questions and comments in the Q&A if you would like it that way. You can always also raise your hand if you would like to speak during the Q&A. You'll see that option in the lower, and then we will also be able to lower your hand after you're speaking. And if you forget to lower your hand, I, as a host, can also lower your hand for you once you've finished speaking to the panelists or asking the question to the panelists. Just want to remind all the folks that are logged in tonight that VTA will not tolerate any demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in speech. VTA will remove participants who refuse to adhere to this code. So we want to give everybody a chance to ask their questions. We will have to limit the time during the Q&A if you're going to raise your hand and ask. So we want to make sure that you get in your question. That way we can provide an answer if possible. Next slide, please. So how we participate, we want to make sure everyone kind of understands all the different control features, especially if this is your first time joining us in a Zoom meeting. Zoom's going to be the primary way that we're going to be presenting information and community meetings for now. You'll see that there's a control bar, and this is for those of you that are logged in either on a smartphone or on a desktop. This is how you're going to participate. You're basically going to look at the control panel. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a raised hand icon. This is how you indicate that you have a question, and these raised hands go in order as you're clicking them. So don't worry that you won't get called on eventually. That us as panelists and hosts, we see everyone that raises their hand. That lets us know that you want to provide a comment or ask a question. Then you're going to get a little pop-up that indicates that the host would like to unmute you. And what you want to do is click the unmute myself and then speak. Once you do that, then we'll let you know that you've been unmuted. Please speak, and you can provide your question or your comment. There's also a section called Q&A. This is for you to put in questions and put in comments. And you don't have to wait till the Q&A section of this meeting. You can put in your questions, you can put in your comments now. Some folks have indicated, do I have to wait to the very end to put in my questions or comments? No, because they just want their comments in, and that way they don't have to wait till the end of the presentation to do so. So you can start putting in your questions and comments now. Next slide, please. So if you are joining us by your touchtone phone, you've dialed in, and what you'll want to do when we reach the Q&A portion is dial *9 to raise your hand. That will let the hosts know and the panelists know that your phone number, which I think it only shows the last 4 digits of your phone number, that person, that phone number is asking to speak. And then we'll identify you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. So if you're like me and sometimes forget what your own phone number is, please remember what the last 4 digits of your number are, because that's how we're going to identify you and let you know that we've unmuted you to ask your question or provide a comment. Next slide, please. So tonight presenters, obviously myself, I'm facilitating, David Lovato with Public Communications. I'm a Public Communications Specialist at VTA. I'm also the outreach lead for this project. So hopefully you've seen social media, next door posts, as much information as possible to really promote this project. Those are coming out of our department. Janice Soriano Ramos, she's a senior transportation planner and the project manager, and she's going to be doing the meat of this presentation, providing you as much detail of the proposals that we're presenting to you tonight. Next slide, please. Our panelists who will be providing answers to any questions that you propose, whether you type it in or you're answering it after raising your hand. We have Kermit Cuff. He is a Transit Service Development Supervisor. Franklin Wan, he's the Deputy Director of Finance. And Brandy Childress, who's the Media and Public Affairs Manager. So they, as well as Janice and myself, will be part of the Q&A, answering any questions that you have. Next slide, please. So at the end of the presentation, it's important that we make sure that we are sharing specifically what we're asking the public to provide us so that we can improve on these proposals that we're offering to the board in December. We really need specific types of feedback from the public. We want you to really understand why we're proposing what we're proposing. We want you to, at the end of this presentation, take the time to visit our project webpage and compare all three plans. I can understand it's very easy when you hear 70, 80, 90. Well, I just want the 90 because 90 has very little change. But I want you to start with the 70. Start with the 70% and look at it. And then do the same with 80. Look at each plan individually. What do you like about the plan, or how can we change it so it meets your needs? That is what's most important here at the end of this project, the types of feedback. And I've had the opportunity to see a lot of the types of feedback that we're getting, and it's great. Some of it is very broad. I just like the 90, that kind of thing. But then we have a very specific detailed comments that are coming in, like the 70, if you keep this route or keep this frequency. So it's going to be completely up to you what type of feedback you provide us either tonight, or you go on the project webpage, review and provide comments on the project webpage. But the more detail, the better, folks. The more detail, the better. Next slide, please. So the staff's role tonight, our panelists, myself, as well as Janice, we're going to explain the proposals that we're going to be providing to the VTA board in December. We're going to pass on your feedback to the VTA board. So those of you that aren't familiar with Zoom, every comment, question that you put into the Q&A section, that will be added to the report that we're presenting to the VTA board. If you are going to raise your hand and provide a comment through raising your hand, we are going to be recording that as well. So we want to make sure that all that feedback we get tonight, or if you go onto our project webpage and you provide comment through there, all of that gets fed back to the VTA board. And we're going to use your feedback as we move into the revising of these plan proposals, which we'll go into later. Next slide, please.
So with that, I'll take it away. I thank you again, David, for kicking us off here. And thanks to everyone here who's making the time this lovely evening to spend a couple of hours with us to learn about this 2021 new transit plan that we are proposing here. I know you've been spending a lot of time with us lately in the past year, the past several years, talking about different service plans. And I just wanted to rewind back to not too long ago when we recently launched the 2019 new transit service plan. This plan that you may remember is a plan that we launched in December of last year, and it was a major undertaking, and it was the first major transit redesign that we've done in nearly decades. So as much as this 2019 plan marks the start of a more annual transit plan process, we'd really like to engage with you much more frequently with our community here and really get your feedback on every annual plan we create. And that certainly includes this one for sure. Every year, the service planning process will more or less look like this, where we develop a draft plan in the spring, we share the draft, and we discuss the community with you on the community in the summer. We revise the plan based on your feedback. And then, of course, we propose whatever final plan we come up with to the VTA board to adopt. And that usually happens around the winter timeframe. and that'll be for any new service that we would propose to begin in February of the following year. And while we haven't strayed too much from this process this year, we are working on a much tighter timeframe than we normally would, having to account for a number of uncertainties that really have been caused by this pandemic before we just even started developing the plan. And there's a couple of nuances here, of course. First, which David has already alluded to, is that our discussions with the community so far have primarily been virtual, just like we're doing right now here. And we're focusing on meetings with community business organizations.
Denise, I think you accidentally muted.
Oh, did I? Can you all hear me still? Okay, great. So our meetings have primarily been virtual. We've been hosting several meetings, or we've been tapping into different meetings with our community business orgs,
Denise,
social service.
Your sound cut off.
Oh, okay. I think others can hear me just fine.
End, David.
So I'll continue on. And as I mentioned, we've been keeping these meetings virtual, and we've been complying with the several county shelter-in-place orders and social distancing mandates that have been in place. And you also notice that this time around, our team has had to develop 3 different plans to account for the different amounts of service reductions. So you may ask, why does VTA have to consider these 3 plans for next year? And of course, there are several factors related to the pandemic, but primarily because VTA's transit operating budget relies on sales tax revenues, those have since took a big hit since the pandemic began. And with shelter-in-place orders in effect since March, we've also seen pretty steep declines in riders taking our transit services. And that's certainly an experience that we've seen across the nation. The VTA board actually did meet this past Friday to discuss this issue for the first time, and ultimately they'll be the ones who decide the amount of service that VTA can provide in 2021. And this is really VTA's first step towards envisioning what this new normal service is going to look like. And that said, while we totally understand how hard it is to even talk about what these reductions are going to be, the plan the board adopts is going to be important, and it's going to be the first step in what we can do to gradually bring transit service back, and that could take several years moving forward. As I mentioned, ridership on both bus and light rail plummeted the minute shelter-in-place orders took in place in March, and it hit its lowest point in April. To give you some perspective there, compared to around this time last year in August, we had 74% fewer riders. And this, of course, also fully acknowledges that we're not able to carry as many passengers as much as the amount of service that we've been putting out there today. And our seating capacity is really down by about 80 or 90%. And in many cases, of course, as I think all of you have been observing, in many cases, operators have had to pass riders up, unfortunately. And again, to put into perspective, this shows how much service VTA was providing throughout the year. And by service levels, what we're talking about here is what we measure as far as how many total number of service hours we are able to put out on the road. Around August 10th, we were able to bring back much more of our service compared to earlier in the year, and we were able to add several routes back that were temporarily suspended in March. And for the rest of the year, we'll primarily be able to sustain that same level of service until we have a 2021 service plan that plays out in February. When this was discussed with our board last Friday, we proposed that 2021 can play out in one of 3 ways, essentially. We can either have a 70 plan or an 80% plan that can start in February and run through the course through the entire year until we circle back and run through this process again for 2022. Or, much more ideally, as I'm sure you would all feel, we could also move forward with a 90% plan, but that 90% plan would be implemented in a more gradual phased approach. And this would give our agency the chance to monitor travel patterns, look at our ridership a little more closely, and really remain flexible with whatever future public health mandates are in place early next year. And so the good news that really came out from this board workshop that was held last Friday was one of the board members really seemed to be attracted to a service plan that had 70% of what we operated before. So they are much more attracted in implementing either an 80 or 90% plan. But what would really help us today is to make either of these three plans, if we did have to go with a 70% plan, for instance, to make sure that these plans stand alone and be the best that they can be, whatever happens moving forward. So without further ado, now really getting into the three plans themselves. This is a very important slide that I want everyone to focus on here, and I'll spend some time really getting through this, but it summarizes the general service change themes that we considered across all three plans. The three plans and the changes that we've proposed for all of them are listed from left to right, from the least impactful 90% plan to the most impactful 70% plan. And just for your reference there, the leftmost column in green shows what we were running when we had our normal pre-COVID service, just for your reference. So each plan reflects some of these levels of reductions, and the reductions that you see here are in red. And we looked at different ways we could reduce service in areas such as how frequently we run our bus and light rail service, when our service ends, how much service we provided in the midday as well as over the weekends. And we also looked at plans that may have to propose or discontinue routes and or add new routes as well. And while I won't have the time tonight really to spend on every single route and every single change in each plan, the key takeaways from this slide are that the 80 and 70 plans propose more severe reductions overall. And those severe reductions really are reliant on how frequently our frequent routes run, which they would run only every 20 minutes instead of our normal every 15 minutes. The 80% plan will technically look and feel a lot like today's service, which, as a reminder, is about 74% of what we would normally run in normal times. But the only change would be that there's going to be some midday and weekend reductions across some of the routes. And the 70 per plan, of course, last but not least, would propose to end service across the board at 10 p.m., which is a severe reduction in itself as well. Getting into some of the more service change highlights, I had mentioned that the frequency of our most frequent routes is by far the most impactful change that we could propose for our network. And I highlight here that the 90% plan is the only plan that maintains that frequent network at every 15. And I should also note that if we were to drop down to a 20-minute frequent network, that would make it much more difficult for us to guarantee any sort of coordination with BART service, which will likely run at every 15 or every 30 minutes in 2021. So the next few slides here will really put into perspective where the remaining 15-minute routes would be in the network. Here's what it would look like in the 90% plan. And so again, these are routes that would run every 15 minutes in the 90% plan, which looks no different from what our network was pre-COVID, but the only exceptions are that you may have noticed that routes 60 and 523 would actually just run at every 20 minutes in this plan, so you won't see them here. Here's what the 15-minute network would look like in the 80 plan, a much more drastic change to how our frequent network looks. And of course, a majority of our network, our frequent network, including our light rail network, would run at every 20 minutes. And of course, the 70% plan, that would be our most severe reduction case. And the only 15-minute service that would run here are the routes 22, 25, and Rapid 500. I mentioned that we've got some new routes on the table as well for some of these plans. The first being the Rapid 568 that would act as a rapid version of the Route 68, which provides service between downtown San Jose and South County. So this would be a service that runs on the weekdays, has limited, more spaced out routes along the way. It would run in both directions throughout the day, operate every 30 minutes, and unlike the Express 168, which today provides similar connections, the Express 168 really only runs 4 trips in the morning in one direction and 4 trips back in the afternoon. In the 80 and 90% plans, the Rapid 568 would completely replace the 168. But in the 70% plan, this Route 568 would not exist, and the Route 168 would remain in that case and still operate the 4 trips in the morning and in the afternoon. Just for some visuals here that you can feel free to pause on if you choose to rewatch this presentation. Here's some snippets of what the service would look like along Monterey Road in South County. So essentially it would start in South County, in Gilroy, make its way up to Morgan Hill. But unlike the Route 68, it would continue down Monterey Road through San Jose instead of using Santa Teresa. And here's what it would look like as it makes its way through downtown San Jose. And like the 68, it would continue to make connections at San Jose Diridon Station. Another new route we are proposing is a pilot shuttle that we would be operating in partnership with the County of Santa Clara, and we have a name for it. I guess essentially we would call it the VMC shuttle. And with the county, we've found a much needed market to serve essential workers at the Valley Medical Center on Bascom. This shuttle service would be open to the public and provide peak hour service between Diridon and Valley Medical Center, and applies to all 3 plans that we're proposing. Another structural sort of route change that we're making is the Route 59, which provides service between Valley Fair, Alviso, and the Bay Point Station. And so this is one of a handful of many routes that we're proposing a few, routing changes to. And while the plan proposes to change Route 59's frequency to some degree, as you can see in this pretty detailed table here for your future reference, you'll see that the plan also proposes to extend the route to serve Winchester and Stevens Creek instead of serving the Valley Transit Center or Valley Fair Transit Center. And by extending the service to Winchester and Stevens Creek, this would improve connections to Route 60, as well as allow for more transfer opportunities along Stevens Creek. And this is an improvement that we're proposing for all 3 plans. Another routing change that we are making when you consider these 2 routes as a package is the changes we're making to Route 70 and 71. Route 70 would continue to serve East Ridge, but it would also extend service to Capitol Station and would follow the same routing that it does today between East Ridge and Capitol. Route 70 would stop adjacent to, but it would no longer deviate directly into Hofstadter Station. And that's really to help improve any bus run times that we have on that route. Route 71, on the other hand, would end at East Ridge Transit Center and would no longer serve Capitol Station. And these changes are proposed for all 3 plans. Again, for your later reference, because I realize that these maps may be a little difficult to see on your screen right now, but here's a side-by-side snippet of the 2 routes to show what those changes are, comparing the existing routing against the proposed routing. And as you can probably barely see, this frequent segment of Route 70 would essentially extend itself and replace what would have been a less frequent portion of Route 71. So here's East Ridge Transit Center, and here's the proposed routing for Route 70 between East Ridge all the way down to Capitol. The next couple of slides here, again, are also here for your later reference if you do decide to go back and rewatch this presentation. And in addition to these routing changes, both routes do have proposed changes to their frequencies depending on the plan you're looking at. And those changes here are highlighted in bold in this table, as well as the next table here that I'll flash real quickly here. And a last proposed routing change I'll cover here is the Rapid 523. While in the 90 plan, we propose to reduce its frequency to every 20 minutes on the weekdays, the other 2 plans do propose a frequency reduction, and they also propose to end the route in downtown San Jose instead of at Berryessa BART. The 70 and 80 plans also propose to continue weekend service. And here is a map to show you that if the 70 or the 80 plan were selected, the downtown San Jose terminus for Rapid 523 would end at 7th Street and Santa Clara Street here near San Jose State. A final highlight of the plans are routes that we're considering for discontinuation. And the only plan where we are looking to discontinue routes is in the 70% plan, and those routes are 52 and 83. Similarly, in the 70% plan, we do have Route 87 that once was operating as a peak hour only service, but in the 70% plan, we are proposing to convert that route to serve school trips only. As we developed these plans, and in every service plan that we bring to you all in the community, we closely look at how the service changes would impact our VTA access paratransit service. Everything from how the time of day of service is affected to how its service areas are affected, since the paratransit service area is based on our frequent network. And because we are tweaking how late service would run in all three of the plans, we would find that some late night trips would be impacted. And it's safe to say that very few paratransit trips are actually requested in the late night service in the hours that we are proposing to cut after 10 p.m. for some of the routes. Paratransit service area would also slightly change, but only in the 70% plan, since this would primarily be impacted by any routes that we are proposing to discontinue. And the next slide will do a much better job at explaining that here, where we say that in the 70% plan, some areas of Almond and Valley would be impacted. So this map shows what today's paratransit service generally looks like. And what you'll see is that with us proposing Route 83 to discontinue in the 70% plan, we do have a few impacts that we would see in Almond and Valley. This area in yellow would show riders who were once within a standard fare area. They would now be considered within a premium fare area in the 70% plan. Whereas this orange area here would show riders who would no longer qualify for paratransit service as a result of the 70% plan. In addition to impacts on our paratransit community, we also looked at other equity considerations, such as how our service changes would affect vulnerable communities such as minority and low-income communities. And through our draft Title VI service equity analysis, we found that none of the three plans would would disproportionately or disparately impact minority or low-income communities. Another lens that we use to look and make sure that our service changes didn't impact our riders was really making a focus on seeing how riders on our Title VI routes were impacted. And by definition, our Title VI routes are routes that we have identified as those serving a higher proportion compared to the average of minority communities. So the routes that you see listed here are our Title VI routes, and a majority of them do take place on our core frequent network. And an interesting note that we found when we looked through this lens was that these routes make up 60% of VTA's system-wide ridership. And by looking through that lens, we were able to determine that we weren't making any significant changes to our minority community riders. Outside of this 2021 service plan effort, we are engaging in other transit efforts at VTA that this group could be interested in. First is the Fast Transit Program, which is a program that is aimed at speeding up VTA buses and trains to make them operate more efficiently and thereby lower the cost of operating our service. And this program engages in efforts at VTA that advocate with our municipal partners and encourage them to implement policies and actions that put transit first. We're also looking at alternative mobility solutions, fully recognizing that our fixed route service is just one of many ways that we can continue to provide transportation solutions and tackle different challenges in our county. So this covers a gamut of different solutions, such as more demand response services, perhaps van pool programs, and also takes a closer look at how we could get more involved in the bike and scooter programs that we see out there today. And last but not least, and very important to highlight here, is several months ago, we've launched our 10-point plan to strengthen trust in transit. Our agency is really making conscientious efforts, such as more frequent cleaning and sanitizing, encouraging the use of contactless payment methods, such as Easy Fare and Clipper cards. And we're also making sure that we enforce social distance measures to really keep our operators and our riders safe. So to sum it up here, to return back to why we're all here today, we really want your feedback and we really value how your input could improve all three of these service plans. And there's several ways that we've opened this up here to really engage with us here at VTA. You can keep coming back to our project webpage, which the URL is right there, and it lays out all the different service changes that I've just barely scratched the surface of today. It lays it out by route. You can view it by city. There's also interactive maps that you can play around with, something new that we're trying out to, to really try another way to convey these different service changes to you. And of course, for some face-to-face time over the phone or through email, you can also contact our customer service team, and their contact information is listed right here as well. So next steps here, we are currently in our public engagement period where we can really collect your feedback and hear your thoughts on the draft plan. We do have a deadline of October 16th to collect your feedback so that we have enough time to revise the plan according to what we've heard from you all today and moving forward. We'll revise these plans, present them to our VTA committees in November, and December 3rd is when our VTA board will review the final versions of all three plans and select the amount of service to adopt for our final 2021 transit service plan. And in February of next year, that's when you'll see the service begin. So with that, I'll turn it over to David to kick off the Q&A session.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate the detail that now we're going to be opening it up now to our Q&A. Again, just want to remind folks of our etiquette. Please be mindful that our panelists are here to answer the questions you may have relevant to this project. We want to make sure that we give everybody a chance who's either raising their hands or if they typed in a question, we will get to those questions. If you just typed in a comment, great, that's going to be recorded, but I just want to remind folks that we're here to answer questions because this is the time where our planners and the project team is available to you to answer those questions. So if you provided a comment, they're recorded, but we're going to focus in the Q&A on answering questions. And then you can also just click the raise your hand, and when it's your turn, we'll unmute you. So what we're asking again is to raise your hand by selecting the raise your hand icon. We'll unmute you and you'll receive a pop-up that says unmute, and then you'll be able to speak and provide your comment or your question. Or again, you can type in your question or comment now in the Q&A bubble. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back and forth. So rather than just do all the hands raised and then go to the Q&A, we're going to go back and forth to give everybody an opportunity, especially if they put in a question a while ago at the beginning of the presentation. We'll get to that. Next slide. And a reminder, if you are dialed in with a touchtone phone for this, you're gonna want to press *9 to raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you and identify you by the last 4 digits as your phone number so that you can speak. All right, and with that, we're gonna do a quick screen swap so that I will now take over the presentation. All right, and Janice, can you confirm that you guys can see my screen?
We can see it.
All right.
So David, would you like me to unmute the first caller, or are you unmuting? How did you?
Yes, please. Looks like I will not be able to see the audience.
Okay.
So we'll start off with hands raised right now, folks.
Okay. You want me to do the hand raise too? Is that what we're doing? Is that?
Yes, we're going to unmute we're going to start with the participants who are raising their hands.
Okay, we're doing hand. Okay, I'm sorry. I was totally thinking Q&A when you said that. All right, so Martha O'Connell, I'm going to unmute you if you will please accept the unmute, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, you said questions or comments. The
Comments,
reason
yes.
I'm here tonight is for one reason, and that is we need to keep bus service late at night from downtown City Hall and from the county buildings. People, poorer people, disabled people, seniors like me who are night blind, the only way that we can participate is to be able to get on the light rail and a bus and go home for those meetings. So I ask that you please do not discontinue letting us get back from City Hall or the county when we wish to go and petition our government and participate in meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. And David, did you want me to go to the Q&A? Did you want me to manage that one too?
We'll go ahead and do a couple of hands raised, please.
Okay. Anthony, I am unmuting you. Go ahead. Okay, something did not work. Let's try that again, Anthony. I'm sorry. I'm unmuting you, Anthony. Go ahead and speak. It's not sticking. Let's try again. Is there a trick to unmuting? I keep hitting unmute and there you go.
Okay. Okay.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yeah, now it's working. I don't know why it wasn't, but there you go.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So I have a major question regarding your 70% reduction, because if you are going to operate transit at a level of every 20 minutes on the most frequent services, and the rest will operate every 30 minutes to an hour, should there be a solution in terms of developing timed transfers, especially at major transit hubs like downtown San Jose or somewhere along Santa Clara, or even like a further along the way, so that transit riders won't need to be won't need to feel left behind, especially when they have to commute long distances? Thank you.
This is Kermit. Do you want me to answer that one?
Yes, please, Kermit.
Okay, sure. That's something we can look at. One of the issues with the time transfers is that it basically slows the service down. You know, we've done it late at night many times, you know, when we really want things to connect, like at midnight. If you do it at 4 in the afternoon or something, that means all the buses have to wait, or the light rails have to wait, and it takes longer to go through. Actually requires more buses and things. But I did want to point out that in the 70% plan, even in that plan, which we hope we don't have to adopt, there are some of the routes, like the 22 and the 20 and the stuff, still run every 15 minutes. It's like what Janice was explaining was more of a general kind of look at them, but on the route by route thing, there are still some that run every 15, and other ones that corridors that have two routes together that are combined. So, okay. Thanks.
Hayden Miller, I am unmuting you. Go ahead and accept my unmute.
Hello. Can you hear me?
You're good.
Yes, we can.
Okay. My question is in regards to weekend and all-nighter service, particularly on routes 22 and 522. I saw that it was proposed that we eliminate the overnight service hours between 1 and 5 a.m. on Route 22, which really serves as a regional connection to get people from downtown to Palo Alto, and also the 520 or the 522 on Sundays. So how can we work, because those are lines, especially at night and on the weekends, that are primarily used by low income people, minorities, and essential workers. So how do we keep them moving?
I can take on that question broadly. Thanks for your question. So across the board, you did see that we were proposing to discontinue 24-hour service altogether on the 22. And one of the reasons, I believe, and Kermit, you can fill in on this if you'd like, the Palo Alto Transit Center, I believe, is limiting their hours during those later hours between 1 and 4. As far as keeping 24-hour service, I do realize that it is significant, but it's also a significant way that we've been able to make some of these service reductions possible in all 3 of the plans. So if we were to continue running that service, we would certainly have to look at other routes that would have to face a few more reductions that we had originally proposed in some way. Kermit, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you hit it. I think is even in the 90% plan, which we all would prefer, I think, over the 80 and the 70, it's still like a 10% cut in service, and it's got to come from somewhere, and that's one of those things. I know operating the AllNight service is very expensive too, in terms of, with they have security alongside with it. You have to have radio dispatchers, you have to have people at the yards and mechanics on call and all that kind of stuff. So it is very expensive. I'm not saying it's not a valuable service, but it's something we had to look at even in the 90% plan. But feel free to make a comment that you think it should, if you think it should stay. That's something we'll look at along with everything else when we look at revising the plan. So.
Absolutely. That's actually a great example of the sort of recommendations that we're looking for you all today, is what sort of service changes that we can try to prioritize in an 80% plan or a 90% plan to really make sure that that's something that carries forward into next year.
Okay, and next we have Christopher Nelson. Christopher, you can just accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Hi, thank you guys for the meeting today. I have 3 questions really that I have. One, in the 80% plan, is there any way for like the light rail rapids and a few of the main connecting arteries to the new BART stations as well as through downtown would be able to stay at the 15% regularity? It seems like that's very crucial to a big goal of your guys to get more people, especially post-COVID, assuming that happens next year, riding. Another is, you mentioned that sales tax is one of your main sources of funding. And is there any alternative that is being looked at? And the final part is that the 90% plan included a potential July post-COVID bump. Are you guys looking at any other plan in the 80 to 70% that would do that?
Thank you. Denise, Kermit, either of you want to respond?
Well, I can say on I don't have much information on the financial side. Someone else can handle that. But on the 80% plan, there are some of the frequent routes that are still at 15 minutes, even though the majority are at 20. Similar to like in the 70 plan, there's just more of them. In order to go like in the 90% plan, they're pretty much all 15-minute, the frequent ones. But again, it's a trade-off, of like in order to that was where we started when we first planned. It's like, let's make them all 15 and see what happens. But then we would have had to cut so badly on other places and discontinue weekend service and other things that are, very difficult to do. It's difficult choices. So let's, I guess, hopefully we can convince the board to transition to a 90% plan, and then we will all, get the we'll be able to keep the 15-minute service as the ridership increases in the future.
Thank you, Kermit. Franklin, did you want to follow up with anything on that?
Sure, sure, David. In terms of alternatives to sales tax revenues, when we look at our total, the types of revenues, sales tax related ones, account for more than 3/4 of our total revenues. And the second largest category happened to be transit fares. And as you can tell, where I'm getting down to is that number one, for sales tax revenue, since the pandemic started, we have been suffering with significantly lower sales tax revenue, and it's very unpredictable at this point. So, as recent as the last quarter, we have seen, close to 20% drop in sales tax revenue. And two other sources of sales tax related revenue that VTA relies on, I hate to throw out acronyms, but here they are: TDA and STA. Those are formula funds that have some correlation with sales tax revenue, and also diesel tax as well. And both of those, according to the latest forecast from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, they're going to be significantly lower than what we have budgeted. When I say significant, actually for TDA is at least 20%, and for STA is actually close to 50%, 50. So these decline in revenue sources do cut into our projected total revenues. And for the low ridership level that VTA has been experiencing since the pandemic started, right now we are at about a little bit more than a quarter of what we carry before the pandemic. Our transit fares revenue also take a big hit as well. So long story short, we are also looking for other revenue sources such as advertisement, try to do a better job on hopefully getting more investment income. But, given the economic uncertainty, those could also be pretty challenging as well. So I hope I could be a bearer of better news.
Thank you, Franklin. Okay, we're going to switch over to our Q&A now. Folks have been putting in questions since the beginning, and we want to take some time to answer those. So Kathleen Podrasky with VTA Community Outreach is going to be assisting us with that. So Kathleen, if you want to read off some of our Q&As, and we'll defer those to our panelists.
Okay, has VTA looked at how the proposals would cut off riders from hospitals, libraries, and community centers? Janice?
Sure.
Janice.
Sure, I could kick off the answer here. So what we did when we looked at potential reductions we would have to make to certain routes was we actually wanted to make sure that we weren't affecting routes that were serving these very crucial community services. We looked at ridership and tracked it during this COVID emergency service levels. And in addition to looking at how ridership was in the past, we wanted to make sure that we weren't making significant cuts to routes that were, being more frequently ridden now compared to any other routes. And so we saw that there were certainly some routes that were being much more utilized than others and faced a far less reduction in ridership when you compare it to last year. So that was one method that we used to make sure that we would reduce how much reductions we'd make on those routes. So I hope that addresses the question to some extent.
Thank you.
Does Kermit have anything to add?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Another question. So if you let me see, I'm just trying to make, if you cut, looks like the end at 64 and you are an essential worker who works 24 hours at a grocery store. So I guess basically if you work 24 hours and you work at a grocery store and you are cutting, it looks like it's about the line 64. How do you get to work or go home if your route is it has been a 24-hour route service? How does that affect folks who do rely on our service, who have those odd hours?
Yeah, I think this question was regarding line 83, route 83 in Almond Valley, and just saying that if we cut that off, then there'd be no service south of Almond and Camden in the Almond area. And I mean, and there is no good answer for that. That's why we don't want to do the 70% plan, right? I mean, because that is an area where they would lose the transit service. And although there's not much ridership there and the route doesn't run that late now, it's still something that we hope we can avoid. It wouldn't be, the 83 would still remain in the 80 and 90% plans. It's only the 70% plan that it gets cut.
Okay. Some riders are getting stranded due to COVID. How are you going to address those who are stranded if you are reducing buses, if you're reducing service?
You know, if everyone can hear me, I can try to answer this question. I was taking some of these offline as well in the chat. You know, with COVID, it's been a different experience. We've had limited capacity on our buses, and that's mandated by the Santa Clara County Health public officials. We need to keep people 6 feet and safely distanced. So that, again, really limits the capacity. So we are in a situation where we have to move to drop off only. And we have buses that come behind those other buses to pick up passengers that might not be able to board. But obviously that's what happens when there's not enough service in the streets. So that is why, again, we're looking at these scenarios. And as we try to welcome people back to our system after, you know, some of the pandemic restrictions and the stay-at-home shelter restrictions ease, we need to put service on the streets. So that is why it's important that we hear from you. We don't want to stay at COVID level service, but we absolutely need to know where the routes that are the most impactful for you need to be, and where we need to provide that service.
Thank you, Brandy.
Sure.
Which of the 3 plans is most sustainable with the uncertainty of the amount of federal financing that may or may not be forthcoming? Also, why is the 523 not considered for ending at 7th and Santa Clara?
Well, frankly, if you can take the first part, I can do this 523 part.
Okay, thank you, Kermit. And, you know, from a purely financial point of view, of course, you know, the 70% plan will be the most sustainable. However, you know, if the economic condition may, you know, with the gradual easing of the, you know, of the shelter-in-place order, you know, and also the statewide color coding scheme right now, Santa Clara County is code red. And looks like, you know, all the indicators are moving in the desirable direction. And if that is so, then if our sales tax revenue, you know, start to head back also in the more desirable direction, then the other 2 options could also be pretty viable as well.
For the 523 question, yeah, the 523 is one of the routes that we have to make some decisions on if we go, whether we go to the 70, 80, or 90 plans. And so right now in the 70 and 80 plans, it would end at 7th and Santa Clara. On the 90% plan, it would continue to Berryessa-Bart. Right now, the route is going to Berryessa-Bart. So if we were going to, if we end up going like to an 80% and then a 90% plan, it would be very awkward to have it go to Barry's to BART and then cut it back and then go back to BART again. So that's one of the things that we would like comments on the plan, specifically on the 80 and 90 plans, is what to do. I know we've gotten a number of comments saying, hey, it should just end downtown, even in the 90% plan, and use those hours for something else, while other people feel like it should go to BART. So that would be a good thing. Right now, we don't have a lot of ridership out of BART, of course, just because of the whole COVID thing. San Jose State's out and everything. So we've never really gotten a chance to see what the demand would have been like. But that is one of the main questions we have to answer in the plan, is what to do with the 523. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, Kermit. David, you want to stay on Q&A or go back to hands? Or
let's
keep
do
going?
one more, and then we'll turn it back over to me, and I'll do the hands.
Okay. Can we restore Almond and Light Rail to help connect one of the communities facing the greatest cuts, considering the line only required one train?
I was busy trying to answer that one through the chat, and the reason we ended up cutting the Almond Light Rail line in the new transit service plan in 2019 is that, even though it's one train, it's multiple operators that have to operate that service, and the high cost of personnel is what drives that cost to operate. So that was one of the unfortunate cuts that we needed to make in order to be able to invest in other areas that had higher ridership and a better return on investment. Bringing that line back, I could turn to Kermit or others in the planning side to probably give you more information about this, but I really don't think that's a consideration at this point. We do have the line 13. We have other services out there that accommodate the ridership that we see in the corridor.
Just to add to what Brandy said, I certainly sympathize with losing the line. Like the light rail costs twice as much to operate as a bus. So if we're running, let's say, 5 hours of a train, we can run 10 hours of a bus somewhere in the system, and that was part of the consideration too. That goes into the decision. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Kermit. We're going to switch gears and go back to our hands raised. We have a couple of hands up for a while. Michael, I'm going to unmute you if you want to go ahead and accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Okay, so I want to protest the targeting of Route 83 for elimination. Route 83 is an improved version of Route 13, which at one point has nearly 600 daily riders. The VTA kept cutting and cutting service until the route was a shell of itself. Last year, our Almond community worked with VTA to create the 83, which doubles the number of destinations that this one bus reached. Kermit Cuff, as well as Jay Tyree, seemed pretty impressed with our idea. And what's the result? Well, talking to people who ride at 83, as well as drivers, they noted that the route seems to be doing much better pre-COVID because that bus went to so many different places. And let me point out that bus serves three major schools there, Leland, Bret Harte, and Castellaro, as well as the library in Almaden. So I do not believe that this should be under consideration for cutting.
Thank you, Michael.
Make sure to make that as a formal comment. That'll be good. And again, it's only in the 70% plan that, unfortunately, it seems like the board is not leaning toward picking that. So that's the good side to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kermit. Mark, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Yeah, hi. One of the suggestions with the 523 on weekends, with you deleting it, would be to keep it going and running, at least from Lockheed to maybe half of the way, because there's people stranded from maybe the middle of the one for Lockheed all the way to El Camino. Like, if we're at Maud and Matilda, we can't even walk all the way to El Camino. It's that far, or to Lockheed to catch the light rail. So I think you guys should have that going, and then maybe get it halfway, because I know there's a 23 out there. So that 523 would also cover the 23, so they can cut it halfway. That's my main point.
Thank you, Mark.
I can let you know too that we've gotten a lot of, not even about the service plan, but we've gotten a lot of comments about the 523 on weekends, and most of it has to do with the Sunnyvale to Cupertino section, where there's nothing else on Matilda, and the ridership on Matilda is not very good on the weekends and stuff, but it does serve an area that no other route does. And so in looking at things that we're going to, like I said, the 523 is one of the more difficult things that we need to look at for this next plan. And we will look at revisions that involve, the 523 on the weekends, even if it's only running part of the route. That's some of the things we're looking at. All depends on what we can afford and in the end, but we are definitely looking at that because we've gotten a lot of comments about it.
Thank you, Kermit. And Andy, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and accept the unmute and go ahead and speaking.
Yes, thank you. I think I have 3 questions also, but hopefully this won't be too hard because they all refer to things that I think have come up, during this webinar. So I think the first thing was like during Janice's part, like one of her slides showed that the 70% plan would have 3 lines discontinued. A chart that I saw about before tonight's event on the website said that there would be 2 lines discontinued, but then something else somewhere else showed a total of 4 lines, meaning that I saw line 44 was meant to be discontinued. So there's a little discrepancy between whether the 70% plan would be either 2 lines, 3 lines, or 4 lines. I saw different numbers based on where I looked. So I wonder if maybe somebody could take a look at that or update that. The second question also I think came up. Janice had something that she said that caught my attention, which is that if we somehow go to any plan where either the frequent buses are 20 minutes apart, or even if, let's say, the light rail is 20 minutes apart, then it gets a lot harder to try to coordinate with BART's schedule, perhaps at Berryessa where the buses are, or even if light rail were to run on 20 minutes, does that mean that it's hard to try to meet a BART train if BART is running either 15 or 30 apart? That's something that I think Kermit has mentioned to me. The last thing I think somebody just asked, and maybe Kermit and also someone else just answered, but the thought about the Almond light rail is not, if I were to suggest if that could ever come back, because I'm based in this area also, I wouldn't think of it as just a line that only goes 2 stations all day long, but I would suggest the Almond light rail to be the end of a much longer line. So again, this may not be realistic for a long time, but I would suggest I can't remember the colors, but I would suggest what you guys did back in December, which is Mountain View to Alum Rock, Bay Point to Almaden, meaning the end of the very long line, and then Santa Teresa to potentially Winchester, as if it was the old Sharks train, so to speak. Thank you for anything you can say about these 3 things.
Thank you, Andy.
Hi, Andy. Thanks. I can tackle the first 2 questions you had. You had pointed out the discrepancies you were seeing in what we were listing as discontinued routes. And I'll certainly look into the different sources where we've listed all of the discontinued routes, but I can confirm here today that the only 2 routes that we are proposing are under the 70 plan, and those are routes 83 and 52. And I believe one point, the route 87 had been listed as a discontinued route, but after further thought about how we should classify it, we're not technically discontinuing it, but rather we've decided to just convert what was once a peak hour only service to serve more of a school route. So I guess it's more of a reclassification of what you would consider Route 87 to be. And I think your second question was regarding the concern you had about the board selecting a plan that would propose a frequent network frequency of every 20 minutes. And I had mentioned that it would make it virtually almost, impossible to perfectly coordinate with BART service, because in conversations that we've had with BART, they are proposing to run their service every 15 or 30 minutes in 2021 once things, get back into shape. And with us having a frequent network frequency of every 20 minutes, it gets kind of awkward to time our buses and our light rail to meet BART trains that come in, and just trying to figure out how much time to schedule in for people to offboard from BART, head down the stairs, board onto any one of our services. That certainly gets difficult with how everything divvies up between 15 and 20, or 20 minutes and 30 minutes. So your understanding of that is correct.
Thank you, Janice. And I just want to comment, Andy, on if there's discrepancies. Our project team, as well as myself, are going to try and make sure that all the information that's on the project webpage is accurate to our presentation. So thank you if you caught those discrepancies. We appreciate that. We'll definitely be looking into that immediately following this presentation. We're going to go to Greenie Van Buren. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and accept the mute and go ahead and speak. Greenie, whenever you're ready.
So I was wondering if you would be recording this message, this meeting, and send us the recording.
Absolutely. We are recording this presentation, and we can happily send it to all project subscribers, as well as put it up on the project webpage.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And with that, we're actually going to move over back to Q&A, which will be led by Kathleen.
Thank you, David. Okay, this might be part of a conversation that Brandy was responding to earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and read it anyway. It says, if you're going to implement a drastic 70% reduction in service where most bus lines will operate at most every 20 minutes, and many services might operate every hour, is there a way to implement time transfers at downtown San Jose to facilitate all the needed transfers between buses and light rail? I truly hate to see so many transit riders being left out in the cold, especially when you already operate a semi-skeletal transit schedule. That was long. You got it?
Yeah, I think we answered that one a little earlier on the, as far as we try to do that late at night, but if you have you can only have so many things connect. And then if you have things waiting for each other, everything takes longer if everything has to wait for each other. But definitely it's a valid concern when things are not running frequently. And that's something we'll definitely look at.
Okay. Okay, so if you move many buses to the BART station, are those getting reduced if they have low ridership? Why don't you reduce the BART transit bus if they have low ridership?
I can take that question. So in developing all of these plans, we prioritize as much as possible to maintain any BART connections we previously had on our bus and light rail network. And while we know that that's not always entirely possible, it was one of our priorities when we went in developing all of three of these plans. And although ridership is low in our services that connect to BART today, we do feel that it's important to give it a fighting chance, since BART was only able to start its service up in the South Bay just recently. And we would like to monitor how it goes in this first year before we make any drastic cuts to any BART connections that we've already proposed in our 2019 plan. Thank you.
I think what you just answered almost answers this next one, Janice. I don't know why the 523 has to go all the way to BART. The 500 connects downtown with BART. Santa Clara Street is saturated with buses, and the 77 connects King Road with BART.
And I think that's a good comment. You know, that to me,
It
that's
is.
a comment. That's the kind of thing we want to see. So when we have to sit down in a few weeks and figure out how to revise the plans, that's a very good comment. So it's not like we, you know, it's not like we need to answer anything right now. I think it's just that's the kind of comment we need, is very constructive criticism like that and helpful suggestions.
Can we restore the Route 22 to 24 hours on the 90% plan?
I think again that would be a comment. It's not in the plan now for the reasons we mentioned, but that would be definitely appropriate as a comment to go in as a request, you know, to how to improve the 90% plan, and it would be considered along with all the other requests when we make the revisions.
Okay. This is more about the meeting, not the routes. So David, you might want to take this one. How do we make these meetings more accessible? Participants were required to register online, open an event ticket and email, open a Zoom link on a ticket, enter an email to join Zoom webinar. Too many steps for people who aren't tech savvy or do not have internet and email. Please make call-in information more available. We do have a lot of options.
Thank you, Kathleen. So yeah,
Thank you,
I can answer that. So definitely this is a very new approach to public outreach. I can attest to learning all the bells and whistles to Zoom, and I can understand it's frustrating, and especially if you're someone just like me, very untech savvy and have to go through the motions a couple of times. For these public meetings, what we're offering is one, correct, Eventbrite registration, but it's not mandatory. In fact, it's in there saying that it's not mandatory. People can opt to register for Eventbrite. What Eventbrite does is it sends you automatic reminders of the meeting, which is why we really, for a lot of our community meetings, we like to use that platform because it automatically sends you reminders. It automatically sends you the link to this meeting, which is great that you're here today joining us all. Also with Zoom, it offers a dial-in option. In fact, one of our panelists tonight is dialed in. He's using a touchstone, so he does not have a desktop nor a smartphone. He's dialed into this meeting. So dial-in option is going to be available for all VTA public meetings in the future as well. This presentation is also live streaming on YouTube, so folks that want to just view the presentation, view the project webpage and provide their comments there, or they can call customer service and provide their comments directly to our customer service staff who are answering your calls. So we do have a lot of different options, and I can understand someone who may be hesitant to use the Zoom channel. We do have YouTube live streaming, and we do have the dial-in option too. And at any time someone is hesitant or has questions logging into a future meeting, they can always call either customer service or they can call VTA Community Outreach, and we'll walk you through the steps of how to be a part of the public meetings in real time.
Okay. Let's see. Waiting for ridership connecting to BART to pick. Okay, I'm starting this one over. Waiting for ridership connecting to BART to pick up. Route 83 also started at the same time at the end of last year. Why don't you let Route 83 ridership to also build up before even contemplating eliminating it?
I think the best thing is to, which I think you have here, is to put in is to register as a comment that in the 70% plan, please do not discontinue this at 83. Find somewhere else to cut. I think that's what they're asking, and we'll put that in as a comment. Again, just to reiterate it, I think from the board, you know, we didn't know this till last week, but the board seems to be leaning toward trying to do a 80 or 90% plan, which is great, which would make this a non-issue. So I hope we hope that's the case. But at any rate, please do, we'll take this as a comment to that you don't want the 83 discontinued in the 70 plan.
And just so you guys all know, all these comments are recorded as well. Is literally written, recorded for us as well on Zoom, because you have some really long ones here. The rest, I'm trying to see if there's questions in the comments. David, do you want me to read the comments out or?
No, the comments are recorded. Okay. We're going to focus on questions so that we can utilize our panelists while they're here.
Okay. The rest are comments right now.
Okay. And again, we encourage anybody that wants to ask our panelists a question, they can also raise your hand as well. We do want to remind folks after this meeting, we encourage everybody to visit the project webpage and look at the proposals for themselves. That way they can really dissect the routes that they use, plan to use, and see what each proposal is being offered. That way, when you are providing comments and feedback, you're detailing specific routes, because when our comment intake is happening, we know what route you're talking about and categorize it by if the issue is frequency, routes, service, things like that. So the more detailed your comments are, the better. So it's very highly encourageable to visit the project webpage. We do have a hand raised. Anonymous, if you can accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Yeah, so I'd like to point out that nothing in your presentation reflected the fact that between April and August, a whole bunch of different routes were discontinued. I'd say the 37, the 52, the 83, the 31, and so forth. And I think it's certainly unfair to judge any of those routes by that ridership. Removing service altogether will has a devastating blow on that ridership that will take years to recover from. So I would strongly urge you to, in your public presentations and your presentations to the board, acknowledge that some of these routes, the ridership may be low, and that's part of the reason. The other thing I would say is, this is completely unrelated, but the 42 line and the 70 line, they overlap quite a bit along Capitol Expressway. If there's any way thinking about restructuring that can help perhaps reduce the resource utilization on that would also be helpful.
Anonymous, just to let you know, your audio was fading in and out. So we would really appreciate if you can type in your comments. We can make sure it gets recorded precisely. We would appreciate that. Unfortunately, it was a little muddled. So I know you mentioned 22 and 82, but on our end, it was a little muddled. So we'd appreciate you if you wanted to add that to the comments so it's recorded verbatim. We'd appreciate that. Christopher Nelson, if you can go ahead and accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Yeah, I had one follow-up question from something that was said earlier. There was a statement that at least for the Almond line for the light rail, that like one light rail is like equal to 2 bus runs, right? So I was just curious in terms of ridership, do you find people tend to use the light rail more than buses or vice versa, or is it pretty evenly spaced apart? Because when I think of the light rail, I think of it as like the major artery through the system. And I have seen, at least during the pandemic, when I've had to go to the doctors and stuff, because I am mass transit only, the light rail seems to be more populated than the bus lines. But I was curious if you guys knew those statistics and kind of understood that, because that's where I think having the 15-minute light rail, making sure it's open till 12:30 is probably one of the high priority items. But I'm not sure if you guys have statistics to back that up.
Thank you, Christopher. Janice or Kermit, did you want to respond?
Sure, I could start. Generally speaking, I will say that I guess if you look at it and slice it up as far as how many riders we get per hour, our light rail service is far more productive than, any of our bus routes would be, but that's just the nature of how light rail service is compared to bus. So I guess fully acknowledging too that light rail does about cost twice as much as, your typical hour of service on running bus as well.
Thank you, Janice. Kermit, did we need any follow-up?
I can just mention that there's in the 90% plan, the light rail would be at 15 minutes and it would go till 12:30, at least on weekdays and Saturdays. So it would pretty much stay, we'd have good service if we could get the 90. The 80, it's when we're still at 20 minutes on the weekday. So.
Thank you, Kermit. Anonymous, if you wanted to accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
I had already sent my comments.
Oh, okay.
No, this was relating to the discontinued bus routes between April and August. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. It's much clearer this time. This
Yes.
was relating to the discontinued routes between April and August, the 20, 31, 37, 52, 83, 86, and 87. In your presentation to your board, I noticed that you didn't acknowledge at all that these routes were being had been discontinued, two of which are on the 70% cut list, the 52 and the 83. I think it's grossly unfair to, when the plug is pulled for 4 months on these routes, to then see ridership plummet and then say, oh, it's not there, so we've got to discontinue some more. So I think I'm wondering if you can acknowledge that fact in your board presentations moving forward and also in your public presentations.
Thank you. Janice, any follow-up?
Oh, no, I don't have any follow-up, but that is a valid point. We did have to reduce our service quite a bit earlier in the year and of course now, and it's certainly something that we have highlighted to the board, not route specific, of course, but it is important to point out that we've reduced service, but even with the amount of service that we did reduce, and on top of that, just us having to comply with social distancing measures and having to cap how many seats we're able to provide on the buses, that is certainly not lost on us, that it affects our overall ridership and seeing how many people are actually riding our service. So comment definitely noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. And we've got additional questions in the Q&A. I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen.
Hi, there's a new one. If Route 22 does resume to the 24-hour services, will the ridership, or can they transport safely to the Caltrain station in the early morning?
Kermit, Janice?
I'm not sure exactly what the question refers to. It could be about homeless on the 22 if it's running 24 hours, and then would it be safe? That's kind of what I'm reading of it, but I'm not really sure if that's and I certainly wouldn't have the answer to that, being in the scheduling department, but I think that's maybe what the question relates to.
Possibly, if you want to expand on your question, we welcome that.
Sorry, I was muted. I live next to the train. We do have a hand raised. Andy, if you want to accept the unmute and go ahead and speak.
Thank you again. This is the second time. I just thought about something that I think Janice had said earlier, and it made me wonder. I maybe this will be one of the last things that come up tonight, but I thought that regardless of what happens next year, and whether it's the 90% plan, which is easier for passengers, or whether it's the 70% plan that's harder, but I'm thinking just about one of the main things, especially if you're riding either bus or light rail and then transferring to something else, meaning either BART or Caltrain, is, either the coordination or the lack of it, right? And that mostly has to do with schedules, like Janice was saying. How can you really try to meet a BART train if they run 15 and 30 minutes apart and then you run 20 minutes apart, your light rail or your bus? But I think the other thing that Janice had mentioned is even just the way that the bus and light rail are positioned within those very large BART stations, where the BART train is on their platform, how far away that is from your bus or your light rail. And so even when your frequencies may match, then there's that in-between time that ultimately makes the difference between whether a passenger either makes a train or misses it, or makes a bus or misses it. And by the way, everything I just said even applies to Daradon, which has been there a lot longer, and then basically either trying to make a Caltrain or get off a Caltrain to try to make or miss VTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up this session, but what I want to do is come back to full fold of making sure that everyone's aware that we still are taking public comment, public feedback for this project. And we want to, again, share the project webpage with all the attendees. We encourage you to visit the project webpage, look at the proposals, and definitely provide feedback.
Chúng ta sắp sửa chấm dứt chương trình, nhưng mà ông David Lovato của VTA muốn nhắc nhở quý vị là quý vị vẫn có thể liên lạc để có câu hỏi hay là muốn tìm hiểu thêm tin tức với cái trang mạng mà quý vị thấy trên cái màn ảnh, đó là www.vta.org/2021 Service Plan.
I'm going to undo my screen share here. Oops. Janice, can you confirm, am I still screen sharing?
You are.
I'm trying to get out of it because I'm hearing translator audio over my hearing.
I can still see your screen.
Okay.
Might have to go up top.
I'm trying to get out of it. Sorry, folks.
Xin lỗi quý vị.
There you go. It's not letting me get out of it, but I don't know why I'm not able to get out of my screen share.
It's the end of the meeting.
Janice, did you want to wrap up? Because I'm hearing audio that I'm not going to be able to speak and hear at the same time.
I think we all can hear it, but I guess just to wrap things up here with everyone that's still signed on, we really appreciate you spending some time with us tonight to learn about our service plan. To reiterate and close up here, of course, we are accepting comments until October 16th. And if you do want to tune in to yet another one of our virtual meetings, we do have one again on September 29th in the afternoon, or not the afternoon, but from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Or if you'd like to spread the word and encourage your neighbors, your colleagues, anyone who would be interested in learning more about the plan, certainly encourage them to tune in. And of course, you have this presentation to refer back to now as well. Any other closing remarks?
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Right.
Apologize for the last minute snafu, but we're still learning all the bells and whistles here. We do have another we do have another public meeting next Tuesday, the 29th. It's going to be a midday, 11 o'clock, for those folks that are working from home like myself and want to log in. So we welcome you to join us again. So see everybody then. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.
Cảm ơn tất cả